Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Helen Cannon, and I will be discussing Florida's coastal habitats with you this evening. So first of all, we're going to start off with the coral reefs. As you know, they are gorgeous structures that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. They are made from coral polyps that are held together by calcium carbonate, and when those coral polyps die, they leave behind these structures that form the beautiful coral reefs that we see. Yeah, just gorgeous. And they are located in tropical areas around the equator. Anywhere from Australia, here in Florida, Belize. The largest one, or actually the second to largest coral reef is actually in Belize, and the largest one that we know is the Great Barrier Reef. And this is a physical map of all the coral reefs. As you can see, very centralized near the equator. Physical factors: they need sunlight to survive, they need warm water to survive, they need to be typically in between 68 to 90 degrees, and they thrive in normal salinity, pretty normal salinity, 30 to 40 parts per thousand. And some of the coral reef inhabitants, they're home to thousands of species between fish, sharks, crabs, sea turtles, you name it. And here's some pictures that I have of these guys. Oops. As you can tell, we got the Percula clownfish from Finding Nemo, copperband butterflyfish, black triggerfish, clown triggerfish, regal tan. We've got Dory. Yes, I know I'm not funny. And we have our long-nosed hawkfish, yellowmouth moray eel, pygmy seahorse, sea turtles, Caribbean reef sharks, which are super cool, spotfin lionfish, toothy goby. Yeah. And the importance of our coral reefs is it's so important to so many economical industries that we have. And we have, anywhere from tourist attractions to hotels and restaurants to fishing industries. That's the biggest one. And it protects our shorelines from storm surges. And it makes our ocean cleaner. It filters the water, it gives it better quality, and it makes it more clear. And the threats to coral reefs is, of course, ourselves. Physical damage caused by dredging, destructive fishing practices, using coral to make jewelry, which is really sad, and toxic substances like waste, sewage from, sewage runoff, all of that. And our current conservation efforts is in 1988, the president created the Coral Reef Task Force, and it's in order to monitor and protect our coral reefs and to make sure there's no overfishing and, there's finding solutions to pollution problems. And they also started the Coral Reef Early Warning System, and it monitors reefs by allowing scientists to test for numerous things regularly, like temperature and salinity, so we can find out actually what is causing bleaching. And next we have our mangroves. Mangroves are trees that grow in low oxygen soil. They look almost like they're propped up on stilts. They have a very intricate root system. They actually are best off in, shallow waters because the slow-moving sediment is what, gives them nutrients to their roots. And mangroves are also located in tropical regions, the mangrove forests. We have them here in Florida. They go all the way down to Argentina. Pretty much all over. Very common in Australia and New Zealand. My sister lives in New Zealand, and she tells me all the time about how she goes to the mangroves. So it's pretty cool. And as you can see here, physical map of the mangroves, pretty centralized near the equator. Physical factors is they are intolerant to frost. They can survive in the cold, but it will affect them, it will kill them, it will damage them. And they need salinity because it helps limit its propagule, germination, and seedling growth, and overproduction of mangrove trees. And pretty much it. Then we have our mangrove inhabitants. This is the scarlet abyss. That's pretty popular in some exotic areas with mangrove forests, and they're home to various species, birds, fish, crabs, very similar to all the coastal habitats actually, microorganisms and vertebrates. This is some of them right here. We've got our fauna crab, horseshoe crab, mud skipper. I've seen those. Those are pretty cool. mud lobster, hermit crabs, the Pete imperial pigeon, tree-boring beetle, estuarine crocodile, ghost crab, rusty monitor, fiddler crab, he looks pretty cool, and a beachstone curlew. And the importance of our mangroves is obviously biodiversity hotspots. Are also very important for the filtration of our water. They actually capture sediments and heavy metals and pollutants. And they're also breeding grounds to numerous species such as, sea turtles, fish, shellfish, all that. And they also protect our coasts from storm surges and hurricanes. And the threats to our mangroves is, of course, pollution, fertilizers, chemicals. Us as humans, some people don't find them useful or appealing, so they will rip them out, even to build industrial structures. So they've also been considered to be smelly, and that's also why they've been getting cleared. And the current conservation efforts, pretty much people are just trying to restore by using reforestation methods, like using different species. We have the Global Mangrove Alliance that estimates an increase in the mangrove, habitat by 20% by 2030, which is pretty cool. They're going to be using $10 billion in investments to improve. So, yeah. And now we're on to salt marshes. A salt marsh is made up of mud and peat. Peat is decomposing plant matter. Pretty much the salt water is brought in by and drained by tides, and therefore it creates these salt marshes. And they have a sulfuric smell to them because of hypoxia. And salt marshes are located around estuaries and sounds. They're actually over half of the salt marshes that we have documented are in South Carolina, which is really cool. It's about 344,500 acres of salt marshes in South Carolina. And they're in 99 different countries, so you do the math. In the physical map of our salt marshes, as you can see, they go as far up north as they do south. Mostly located, near the equator, but they're pretty all over the place. And the physical factors, temperature can highly affect these salt marshes. Obviously, the winter, it can freeze them. Anywhere from waves, tides, rainfall, sediment composition, elevation, and slope are all physical factors to salt marshes. And on to our salt marsh inhabitants. Home to many invertebrates, as you know, even fish, crabs, you name it, all very common. Snails and geese and ducks actually like to flock to salt marshes because they feed off of its inhabitants. And here we've got the Gulf salt marsh snake, salt marsh harvest mouse, black salt marsh mosquito, salt marsh sparrow, a purple marsh crab, fiddler crab, mosquito fish, which was pretty cool, tarpon, shrimp, all these little guys. And the importance of these salt marshes is, one thing I read in particular is they contribute a lot to mosquito control, which, amen to that. Thank you. I hope they're everywhere. And it significantly increases fish population, and it provides nutrients to the fish that we catch and eat. So very important. The threats to our salt marshes is, of course, pretty much being disconnected from these tides and being, isolated, and then they dry up. They're declining every year because of that enclosure, and also building harbors and port structures. All of that ruins the chance of restoration, because once they are built over, they are gone for good. And of course, pollution and coastal erosion. Current conservative efforts, we're trying to save them by maintaining current marshes and reduction of the intense development along the coast. There are two options. Obviously, we've just overdone trying to fix it, that it could cause more damage. So it's either to leave it alone or to be proactive in saving the ones that we do have still. And on to seagrass. They are very often compared to seaweed. They're not seaweed. They're actually more related to flowers. They actually produce flowers and seeds, which is really cool. They got their name because they're long, green, leafy looking guys. And yeah, there are approximately 72 different species of seagrass. And there's a photo of it underwater. Beautiful. And here's for our location, they grow in semi-salty waters, shallow waters near protected coastal areas. They depend on light for photosynthesis, and they typically live in water 3 to 9 feet, but they've been found as far as 190 feet, which is pretty cool. And there are approximately 14 types of seagrass growing together at one time, I guess. So here's our physical map of all the seagrass. It's pretty much everywhere, along as you can see the coasts. They don't, some of them are pretty far out, but not too crazy. And then the physical factors is, again, they need sunlight to survive because they're plants. They need additional oxygen from surrounding water because they cannot produce enough oxygen to support living cells themselves. And they need much nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, so they need to be in those areas. And then there is actually a fun fact, no seagrass in Antarctica, I found out, which is pretty cool. Probably because it's freezing. And our seagrass inhabitants is, it's known as a nursery for habitants for its underwater leafy shelter. And it's, of course, fish, sharks, sea turtles, dugongs, manatees, octopus, you name it, cuttlefish, sea anemones. Oh, and here we have some of them, giant cuttlefish, sea anemones, adult-grade sea turtles, sea otter, manatee, sea lion, bonnethead shark, permit fish, Bahamian starfish, lobsters, seahorses, and a queen conch. And the importance of our seagrass is it's vital to marine life. It also helps the quality of our water and the protection of our shores. And it also produces massive amounts of carbon through photosynthesis. And it produces seeds that fall to the ocean floor, and then it feeds the marine animals or organisms at the bottom of the ocean floor. And of course, the threat to our seagrass is us again. They're very vulnerable because they're in such shallow waters. It's a very difficult environment. So once they're gone, it's very hard to get it back. And it's usually ripped off to make docks or man-made structures, and they keep being drowned from the change in our climate. And our current conservation efforts, our groups are coming together to improve local water quality, preventing damaging fishing practices, and making sure that fisheries aren't fully exploited, and just bringing more awareness to these situations is what's really going to ultimately be the most impactful thing. And we can help our coastal habitats by reducing the amount of plastic we use and recycling, improve our building design so when there are natural disasters, there isn't so much destruction, which causes our oceans to get the brunt of it. And we can also promote sustainable, seafood and local organic and hydroponic food. And it would also be better to help a larger transportation system, so the release of carbon decreases. And last but not least, obviously we can make a huge effort to improve waste management and our litter and our garbage and just all the disgusting things we put in our ocean, and conserving water, cut that shower time down by 5 minutes maybe, okay? We need to conserve. So anyways, that is it. I hope you learned something today, and that's all. Bye-bye.